August 15th, 1981. The Fontainebleau Hotel, Miami Beach. The most lavish wedding South Florida had seen in decades. 700 guests, a 10-piece orchestra, champagne flowing like water, and enough flowers to fill a cemetery. But among the sea of Armani suits and designer gowns, one woman sat quietly at table 12, wearing simple black, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Griselda Blanco hadn't been invited. She wasn't supposed to be there. And every person who recognized her felt their blood turn cold. The bride was Maria Elena Vizcachez, daughter of the most powerful Cuban exile family in Miami. The groom was Carlos Ramos, heir to a shipping fortune that moved more than sugar and coffee between the islands and the mainland. Together they represented the old guard of Miami's underworld, refined, connected, and absolutely convinced they were untouchable. What they didn't know was that Griselda Blanco had been watching their empire for 2 years. Every shipment, every contact, every weakness. And tonight, at their moment of triumph, she was about to make them an offer they couldn't understand, couldn't refuse, and would never forget. To understand what happened that night at the Fontainebleau, you need to understand Miami in 1981. This wasn't just a city, it was a frontier. Cocaine money was rebuilding the skyline. Cuban exiles controlled the docks. Colombian cartels were establishing footholds. And at the center of it all was a woman who'd arrived from Medellin with nothing but intelligence, ambition, and a complete understanding of how power actually worked. Griselda hadn't built her empire through blood, though she could spill it. She hadn't built it through fear, though she commanded it. She'd built it through mathematics. Every decision calculated, every move 3 steps ahead, every alliance carefully weighted against its costs and benefits. The Vasquez family controlled 60% of Miami's legitimate shipping. Their warehouses, their dock access, their customs connections, they were the gateway between South America and the United States. For 2 years, they'd refused Griselda's partnership proposals, refused her money, refused even to take a meeting. Tonight, that refusal was about to become irrelevant. The ceremony had been flawless. Father Miguel from St. Genevieve's performed the vows. The bride wore her grandmother's pearls. The groom's voice broke twice, reading his promises. 700 guests witnessed what everyone called a perfect union of 2 perfect families. But as the reception moved into the ballroom, whispers began spreading through the crowd. Is that her? What is she doing here? Who invited Griselda Blanco? The answer was no one. And everyone. Griselda had studied this family for months. She knew Maria Elena's favorite flower, knew Carlos's college roommate's name, knew exactly which security firm they'd hired and which exits they'd chosen to ignore. She knew the guest list better than the wedding planner. She knew the menu, the seating chart, the exact moment when the gift opening would begin. What she also knew was that Don Fernando Vasquez, the bride's father and the real power behind the family empire, was a man who valued appearances above everything. His daughter's wedding was theater, a public declaration of strength, continuity, and respectability. The presence of Miami's most notorious queenpin wasn't just embarrassing, it was a declaration of war. Unless it wasn't. At 9:47 p.m., the gift presentation began. A tradition in wealthy Cuban families where presents are opened publicly, each gift announced, each giver thanked before the assembled guests. The bride and groom sat on a small stage, surrounded by mountains of silver, crystal, and carefully wrapped packages from Tiffany, Cartier, and the finest shops in Miami Beach. Don Fernando handled the announcements personally, from Senator Martinez and his wife. A beautiful crystal vase from Baccarat. Applause. From the Herrera family, a complete set of Italian silver. More applause. Each gift was a demonstration of alliance, respect, and social position. For 43 minutes, the ritual continued.
Don Fernando's voice carried clearly through the ballroom sound system. Every gift was perfect, appropriate, expected, and then the waiter handed him a small black box, unmarked, with a simple white card.
Don Fernando read the card silently. His face went ashen. He looked up, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Griselda Blanco sitting calmly at table 12, her expression unreadable. The ballroom fell quiet. 700 guests sensed something was wrong. The bride leaned forward, trying to read her father's expression. The groom's smile faltered. Even the orchestra seemed to play more softly. This gift? Don Fernando said quietly, is from... He paused, swallowed hard. Griselda Blanco. A collective intake of breath. Murmurs. People turned in their seats looking for her, finding her, studying her calm face. She hadn't moved, hadn't smiled, hadn't acknowledged the attention. She simply sat, waiting. Don Fernando opened the small black box with trembling hands. Inside was a single key. Old brass, worn smooth, attached to a simple chain. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. Just a key. He held it up for the crowd to see. A key. His voice was barely audible now. From Senora Blanco. The silence stretched seconds felt like minutes. Everyone waited for explanation, for context, for the gift to make sense. But Don Fernando just stood there, staring at the key in his palm, and everyone could see that he understood something the rest of the crowd didn't. Because Don Fernando knew exactly what that key opened. 6 months earlier, the Vasquez family had been hemorrhaging money. A series of bad investments in Caracas. A shipping contract that fell through, problems with their customs arrangements that cost them $3 million in seized cargo. They'd been forced to take a loan. A significant loan from a source they'd hoped to keep quiet. The key in Don Fernando's hand opened a safety deposit box in the Cayman Islands. Inside that box were copies of loan documents, bank transfer records, and photographs of meetings that the Vasquez family had sworn never took place. Evidence that Miami's most respected Cuban exile family had been quietly borrowing money from Colombian drug cartels to keep their legitimate businesses afloat. But that wasn't the most dangerous part. The most dangerous part was that every document in that safety deposit box named Griselda Blanco as the ultimate lender. The puppet master pulling strings the Vasquez family hadn't even known existed. For 6 months they'd thought they were borrowing from a consortium of Venezuelan investors. Clean money. Respectable sources. What they hadn't known was that every dollar it had passed through Griselda's organizations, been washed through her networks, carried her invisible signature. She hadn't just infiltrated their empire. She'd become its secret foundation. Don Fernando's hands were shaking now. He looked at his daughter in her wedding dress, at his new son-in-law, at 700 guests waiting for him to explain the significance of a simple brass key. And he understood that this moment, this perfect evening, this celebration of family power and respectability had just become something else entirely. It had become a coronation. Griselda stood slowly. The movement was subtle, quiet, but every eye in the ballroom tracked it. She walked to the gift table, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. When she reached the stage, she didn't climb the steps. She simply looked up at Don Fernando and spoke, her voice carrying clearly in the absolute silence. The key opens many doors, Don Fernando, but tonight it opens just one. The door to understanding. She paused, letting her words settle. Your family's shipping empire moves 60% of Miami's legitimate cargo. My organization moves 90% of its illegitimate cargo. For 2 years, you've believed these were separate businesses. Tonight, you learn they never were. Don Fernando's legs looked unsteady. The bride's face had gone pale. The groom was staring at his new father-in-law, beginning to understand that this wedding gift was something far more complex than anyone had imagined. The loan you took 6 months ago, Griselda continued, kept your warehouses open, your workers paid, your reputation intact. That money came from me, every dollar. With interest that compounds, not in percentages but in partnership. She gestured slightly toward the key in his hand. That key represents a choice. You can open the box, reveal the documents, and explain to Miami's business community how the Vasquez family survived their recent difficulties. Or you can accept that our businesses were always meant to work together, that what you've called your empire was always part of mine. The ballroom was dead silent now. 700 people holding their breath, watching a masterclass in power dynamics play out at a wedding reception. Your family controls the docks. My organization needs dock access. Your family has customs relationships. My organization needs customs relationships. Your family has a reputation for legitimacy. My organization values legitimacy above everything. Griselda took a step closer to the stage. I didn't come here to threaten you, Don Fernando. I came here to make you an offer. Partnership. 60-40 split. You handle the paperwork, I handle the product. You maintain your reputation. I maintain my profits. Your daughter gets to stay married to a respectable man. Your son-in-law gets to inherit a business that will make him richer than his father ever dreamed. She paused again. The alternative is that Key opens doors to conversations none of us want to have with federal investigators, with your business partners, with the families who've trusted you to keep their secrets. Don Fernando's mouth opened and closed without sound. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't even a threat. This was a revelation. The understanding that his family's empire had never been independent, that every major decision for the past 6 months had been influenced by forces he hadn't even known existed, that Griselda Blanco hadn't conquered his business. She'd been running it from the shadows all along. Maria Elena, still in her wedding dress, finally found her voice. Papa? The word was small, confused, fragile. Don Fernando looked at his daughter and his new son-in-law at 700 guests who were witnessing the most important business meeting in Miami's history disguised as a wedding gift presentation. The partnership, he said quietly, his voice barely carrying to the first row of tables. The terms are acceptable. Griselda nodded once. Then the key stays with you, as a reminder that every door in this city opens when we work together. She turned to address the crowd directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting this beautiful celebration, but Fernando and I have concluded some business that will benefit both our families for many years to come. Please, continue enjoying this wonderful evening. Griselda walked back to table 12, sat down, and calmly picked up her champagne glass. She took one sip, set it down, and then stood again. Actually, she said, her voice carrying easily across the still silent ballroom, I have one more gift. From her small black purse, she pulled out an envelope, thick, expensive paper sealed with black wax, for the bride and groom. A wedding present that's just for them. She placed the envelope on the gift table and returned to her seat. Don Fernando, moving like a man underwater, picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. As he read, his expression changed from fear to confusion to something that might have been relief. The document was a complete cancellation of the Vasquez family's debt. $6 million. Forgiven entirely. The photograph showed a warehouse in Caracas that had been mysteriously returned to Vasquez ownership after being seized by the Venezuelan government 6 months earlier. A wedding gift worth $8 million. Don Fernando looked up at Griselda, understanding finally dawning. This hadn't been about forcing a partnership. It had been about demonstrating that the partnership already existed, had always existed, and was profitable for everyone involved. She hadn't conquered the Vasquez empire. She'd invested in it, protected it, made it stronger. And now, in front of Miami's most powerful families, she'd made that partnership public, legitimate, and permanent. Ladies and gentlemen, Don Fernando said, his voice stronger now, I'd like to make an announcement. The Vasquez family is pleased to announce a new business partnership with Senora Blanco's organization. Together we will expand Miami's shipping capabilities and strengthen our city's position as the gateway to Latin America. The applause was tentative at first, then stronger as people understood what they'd just witnessed. Not a hostile takeover, but a merger. Not a threat, but an opportunity. Not a destruction of Miami's old guard, but its evolution. Griselda Blanco had walked into Miami's most important social event uninvited, and walked out as a member of its most powerful family. But what happened next proved that Griselda's real genius wasn't in the deals she made, but in how she ensured they lasted. 3 weeks after the wedding, Don Fernando received a package. Inside was a complete audit of his family's finances, conducted by a firm in Switzerland. Every transaction, every asset, every debt meticulously documented. The audit revealed that under Griselda's invisible partnership, the Vasquez empire had not only recovered from its recent difficulties, but had become 20% more profitable than it had ever been. 6 months later, Maria Elena and Carlos's first child was born. Griselda sent a gift, a trust fund worth $2 million and a single sentence card for the future of both our families. 1 year after the wedding, the Vasquez Blanco shipping partnership had become Miami's largest legitimate cargo operation. They moved everything from coffee to construction equipment, employing over 400 people and generating tax revenue that made them heroes to city officials. What the city officials didn't know was that hidden within that legitimate cargo were the network's routes and infrastructure that made Griselda Blanco's organization the most efficient in the Western Hemisphere. The wedding gift hadn't been a key. It had been a masterclass in how real power works. Not through fear, not through force, but through making everyone around you more successful than they could ever be without you. 5 years later, when federal investigators tried to build cases against Miami's drug organizations, they discovered something that frustrated them for decades. The city's most successful legitimate businesses and its most sophisticated criminal enterprises weren't separate entities fighting each other. They were the same organizations, run by the same families, generating wealth that lifted everyone involved. Griselda Blanco hadn't destroyed Miami's established order, she'd perfected it. The key that silenced 700 wedding guests had unlocked something far more valuable than a safety deposit box. It had unlocked the understanding that in Griselda's world, everyone could win as long as they understood who was really in charge. 20 years later, when investigators finally pieced together how Miami had become the hemisphere's most important hub for both legitimate and illegitimate trade, they kept coming back to one moment, one wedding, one gift that changed everything. A simple brass key that opened every door in the city. The lesson Griselda Blanco taught that night at the Fontainebleau wasn't about crime or punishment. It was about systems, about how power really flows, about the difference between taking what you want and making everyone want to give it to you. She didn't crash the wedding. She was invited by the very system she'd already conquered. And 700 witnesses watched her accept the invitation with a grace that made resistance not just impossible, but illogical. That's why they called her La Madrina. Not because she was the godmother of crime, but because she was the godmother of possibility. The architect of a world where everyone's success depended on understanding their place in her design. The wedding gift that silenced Miami became the foundation of an empire that connected continents, moved billions, and proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't violence, it's making people need you more than they fear you. Griselda Blanco walked into that ballroom as an uninvited guest and walked out as family. The key she left behind unlocked Miami itself.